welcome to week 3 of an introduction to paleontology with the Saved Cultural Heritage Group. This week we are focusing on Devonian fish and the water to land transition in tetrapods. So in today's lesson you will learn what they were, so Devonian fish as well as tetrapods, key dates, paleogeography and paleoclimate, key fauna, key localities, and the fin to limb transition with the key organisms as well as the evidence for this. This might be a two-parter, so I will kind of let you know as we go on. So the key dates is the Devonian, and the Devonian period is during the Paleozoic. It is 419.2 to 358.9 million years ago. And it's known to paleontologists as the age of fishes, as well as the age of sharks. So this is because during the Devonian, fish as a whole have diversified and radiated and become quite a dominant species in the water. As well as this, the first radiation of life onto dry land also occurred. So we had free-sporing vascular plants forming forests, arthropods moving onto land, as well as tetrapods. So the paleogeography of the Devonian is dominated by the supercontinent known as Gondwana, which was to the south, as well as Siberia and Euramerica to the north. These continents were surrounded by the Panthalassic Ocean. Sea levels were extremely high worldwide, and the overall climate was thought to be relatively warm, and this is shown by a lack of glaciers at the poles, because we would have found evidence for this within the rock record. It's thought that the sea surface temperature was an average value of about 30 degrees centigrade in the early Devonian. And then, as well as this, CO2 levels had dropped due to forest forming, which kind of sorted out the carbon cycle a bit. So they would take in oxygen and, take in CO2 and produce oxygen. That's the way it works, yeah. So here is a picture of the Earth in the late Devonian. Sorry about the image quality, this was the best one I could find. So to the south, that is Gondwana, and I can't tell the difference between the two ones there. I think the bigger one is Euramerica, and the smaller one is Siberia. So let's get on to it. So fish are an extremely diverse group of organisms within the fossil record, and they can be kind of distinguished into two main groups. So we've got the Agnathans, which means jawless fishes, and we've also got the Gnathostomes, which are the jawed fish, and they diversified primarily within the Silurian and Devonian. So let's begin with the Agnathans. So Agnathans is Greek, and it means without jaws. So they consist of both present and extinct species of organisms. So the cyclostomes include lampreys and hagfish, and then conodonts are a weird group that we're not really sure as paleontologists what they actually are, and Ostracoderms, which are other jawless fish, as you can see on the right. So the peak diversity of Agnathans was during the Cambrian to Devonian, and the oldest fossil Agnathans appeared in the Cambrian. So for the Agnathans, it's thought that it's a paraphyletic taxon, which includes some of the earliest known fish within the fossil record. And then, so cyclostomes, which are lampreys and hagfish, and they are the sister group to all jawed vertebrates, which are known as Gnathostomes, which we will be coming on to later on in the PowerPoint. So here is a phylogeny of the Agnathans, and as you can see here during the Devonian, we've got quite a large amount of different types of Agnathans in the fossil record. So Heterostrae, Anaspida, Theladonts, Anaspida, Osteostracy, and Heterostrae. They are all known as Ostracoderms, which is an artificial designation of distinctive superclasses of jawless fishes. So at the base of this tree, we have the lampreys and the hagfish. So lampreys, the earliest fossils evidence we have was from 360 million years ago. And hagfish, the earliest fossils that we have for these are 300 million years ago. So it's thought that the divergence time of lampreys and hagfish from each other was 470 to 390 million years ago. So they are the only extant species of Agnathans as well. The hagfish have a skull, but they don't have a vertebral column, which is weird. And these two organisms are known as cyclostomes, and this is due to their round mouths, which is shown on that diagram to the right. Really weird animals. And so lampreys and hagfishes are characterised by the absence of paired fins, as well as the presence of a notochord both in the larvae and adults. So extant hagfish, it's been found that they are morphologically similar to hagfish from 300 million years ago. And then, as well as this, lampreys are more closely related to gnathostomes than they are to hagfish. And then, so the fossil record of cyclostomes is not good, and this is because these fish are cartilaginous, which means that they don't have any like hard parts that really fossilise very well because they're made of cartilage. That's a really weird word to say. Cartilage. And that really doesn't fossilise as well as bone does. So now we move to the Heterostrae, and the first identifiable ones of these in the fossil record was during the early Silurian, and they became extinct by the start of the late Devonian, and this is due to a mass extinction that occurred during the late Devonian. There's over 300 known species in the fossil record, and they are characterised by the armoured head shields. So they have two plates, one on the dorsal side and one on the ventral side. And they have no fins beside the caudal fin. And they greatly varied in body morphology, as you can see to the image on the right. And the scales have 3 layers composed of dentine and aspidine. So next up we have the Anaspida, which they were around 10 to 15 centimetres in length. And there were only around 20 species from the Silurian and Devonian that we know about. They lacked extensive bony plates, and they had instead of that they had small, weakly mineralized scales, as well as a row of scutes behind their head running down the dorsal side. And the typical anaspids are restricted to the Silurian, so meaning that like during the Devonian we have a few examples that we're not really sure on, and their remains have been found mostly in marine sediments. Next up we have the Theladonts, which were known from the Ordovician from isolated scales, and then during the Silurian and the lower Devonian we have more abundant scales and sometimes even whole specimens, which is a very rare case. So they are covered in a distinctive small spiny scales, and these scales are like a lozenge shape, and they're concave underneath. So I'll show you an example in a sec. And these scales might have evolved independently by different species. It's known that both they lived in both freshwater and marine environments, and they became extinct during the Devonian mass extinction. Quite a lot of organisms. So here are the examples. So these are from a upper Silurian aged rock. So as you can see, they are lozenge shape, most of them, and they would have been concave. So the Pterospidomorphes, they have a temporal range from the early Ordovician to the late Devonian, and they are known for their massive dermal head armour, as you can see in that image, as well as having large ventral and dorsal plates on their body. So the overall length ranged between different species from about 10 to 200 centimetres, and their head actually comprises of about 40 to 50% of the overall body length. Most pterospidomorphs lived in marine settings. However, there are a few examples where they've lived close to the shore, as well as in lagoons and deltas. And what's cool with these fish is that they don't have any paired fins, and they have really flat bodies, which suggests that they were most likely to be bottom dwellers. And then finally, within the Agnathans, we have the Osteostraci. So there are around 200 species overall, and they're first seen in the fossil record in the Ordovician. And then they radiated during the Silurian and early Devonian. The average size was around 20 to 40 centimetres length, and they're the first vertebrates to have paired fins, which is really cool and important. So they're thought to be the most advanced of all Agnathans, and their head region, which is really heavily armoured, and there's a single bony piece of the armour, and on the head are closely set eyes. So on the PowerPoint, that should say head and not bed or bead. They are also the sister taxon to all jawed vertebrates, and they are the first fossil jawless fish whose internal anatomy was described in detail. So now we move on to the gnathostomes, and they're known. They are the jawed fish. So gnathostome in Greek means jaw, mouth, and they first evolved during the Middle Ordovician. There are roughly 60,000 species, and they account for 99% of all living vertebrates. And they're traditionally broken into three groupings. So we have chondrichthyes, Placodermi, and Teleostomi. So here's a good phylogeny. Sorry, it's a bit like bended at the end. So we are here in A, where it says Gnathostoma. And that broke off from Agnathans around the end of the Ordovician. So first we move on to the Placoderms, and so these are really famous. The most famous example of which is Dunkleosteus, which is on the right. It was a massive, massive fish. So the head and shoulder regions were heavily covered by articulated armour plates, which meant that these armour plates could move. They're the first vertebrates to have paired pelvic fins. So where your pelvis is, they had fins there. So the first identifiable placoderms appeared in the early Silurian, and then during the Devonian, placoderms radiated and they could inhabit both freshwater and saltwater. So as their body, they had the head and shoulder region that was covered in articulated plates. The rest of their body was either scaled or naked, and the shield on the head was mobile, so they could move it like that. Within the group, within Placodermi, there are 7 clades with over 350 genera, ranging from the Silurian to Devonian. It's sort of currently debated whether it's a clade or not, but I'm not sure. So next in the gnathostomes, we have the chondrichthyes. So these are the sharks and their kin. So we have 2 subclasses, the Elasmobranchi, which are the sharks, rays, skates, and sawfish. And then we have the holocephali, which is the chimeras, which are deep sea fish. They are cartilaginous, and the first definite remains contain cartilage from the early Devonian. So the major lineages of sharks arose in the Devonian and then radiated throughout the Carboniferous. So it's really cool that we have sharks around, and they've survived pretty much every single mass extinction that has been thrown at them. And then we move on to osteichthyes. So osteichthyes include kind of the rest of the fish and tetrapods. So we have the Actinopterygii, which are the rayfin fish. So these, in their fins, they have distinctive bones. So the earliest examples are from the early Devonian, and they are represented only by scales. And then they diversified during the late Devonian and the Carboniferous. So in general, the extant rayfin fish, there's around 27,580 species. And then during the Devonian, we had 15 genera that we know about. And the earliest known fossil Actinopterygian is Androleptis hedii, which is known from the late Silurian. So, and then we move on to the Sarcopterygii, which means the lobe-fin fish. So, Sarcopterygii is Greek, sarco means flesh, and pterygiae is wings. So their fins are like fleshy, and they articulate really well with the shoulder and the hip girdles with a single bone. So that would be the humerus and femur in tetrapods. So there are three sort of extant groups. So we've got the coelacanths, the lungfish, and the tetrapods. So we're actually related to lobe-finned fish, and we all come from fish, which is really, really interesting. So now we have had a whistle-stop tour of fish evolution, we can finally move on to the water to land transition. So that'll be the next video.